All right, gang. So we have touched on what N is, and we've touched on what range is. I'm going to come back. I want to revisit N, talk about it a little bit more. I think here's one of the better examples. For item in numbers, each item in numbers, or for item in numbers, it's a specific syntax in Python. For blank, whatever the value is that it finds, in some sequence. So it's in that sequence. Here is a finite sequence. This is a list. Or the other example that I had dealt with a range. Here, for this range function returned some list of values. It's not in the form of a list. Let's actually go look and see what it is. How do we do that? We say type. I just want you to see what we have as a result of running the range function. So you see what it is? It's not a list. It's a range of numbers. So it's kind of like a list, but it's not. It's not. And here's that range. Here's the result of that range. We saw it there. Printed out 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That is the range that we resulted, or that resulted from this function being passed these values. Let's come back down. I want to look at range. We should be squared away when it comes to in. For val in sequence. For specific values, each value in that sequence. And it goes through one after another. So with this one, we literally typecast the range to be a list. We didn't have to. Range returned a sequence of values. The data type is a range. We want to print it out as a list. We can do more with a list than we can with a range. And I keep saying, oh, I'm going to talk about lists soon. I'm going to talk about lists soon. And I am going to talk about lists soon. We're not far off from that. All right, but with that said, we're just going to deal with where we're at for the time being. List will be in our next lecture, or not next lecture, but the next module. So we've done all this preemptive work to get ready for lists. And lists are huge for us. They allow us to, instead of just dealing with one number, multiple numbers, a sequence of numbers. Now, just because it's a sequence, does it mean those numbers have to be in order? No. There's an ordered sequence and there's an unordered sequence. Doesn't matter either way. There's still a sequence. Now, sequential does not necessarily mean that they are ordered in a numerical order. It just means that this one preceded the other one in the order that they were in. Okay. Now, how does that factor into what we're dealing with? Well, if this is a sequence and we're going through it one after the other, we hit 0 before we hit 1. before we hit 2, before we hit 3. Sometimes sequence matters, and we found that out when we dealt with the logic of what we were doing, that there are things that have to happen before we can do something else. I have to declare and initialize a variable before I can use it. So order can be very important. So this list function, or the range function, excuse me, we go from 0 to 10, range 0 to 10, and that gave us, what is that range? From 0 to 10. We convert that range to a list, 0 to 9. I was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about 0 to 9? It's iterations. Okay. By the time we got to 10, we quit when we get to 10. We don't do anything at the 10. We quit when we get to the 8. We don't do anything at 8. So it's like saying up until, but not including. Okay? Up until 20, but not including. And go 3 at a time. Alright? So that's the range function. Okay. We talked about in. We've talked about the length of things, the length of a string. We'll talk about that in the next module as well. And I think we're good for this lecture. I think this is one of the shorter ones. All right, I'll see you in the next one, and that'll be the fourth our next one. We're going to talk about break and continue.